All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started now. And I think I know most of y'all in this room, but if we haven't yet met yet, my name is Marianna Fisher, and I am the social media chair for Ratio Christi. I have not used this clicker yet, so please bear with me if I accidentally click the wrong button. But we are going to be talking tonight about this question: are holidays pagan? Yes, we are putting Christmas temporarily on the chopping block just to determine the answer to this question. I will go ahead and say that originally this talk could have been about more holidays, but it turns out there's so many interesting things about Christmas that we really only have time to get into Christmas. So I promise I'm not trying to do that, oh, you should say Happy Holidays and not Merry Christmas thing. But we are calling it Holidays as the original title, really just going to talk about Christmas. So here we go. Oh yeah, and by the way, no food vote since this is our last meeting of the semester. But don't forget that tomorrow we are meeting for George Sayegh, who gave the Muslim Objections to Christianity talk. He's coming to us at the Christian Studies Center, 201 Brooks Avenue, to talk about who Jesus is presented as in the Quran in Islam. And then on Thursday night, we're going to have a movie night to watch Am I Racist?, Matt Walsh's documentary. All right, now, without further ado, let's get into this discussion. So because I love starting with definitions, first thing I have to ask you is, what does it mean to be pagan? What do y'all think? Who's got an answer for evil? The definition of pagan is evil. All right, Mary.
Doesn't that have something to do with like worshiping nature, or like nature is a big part of it as opposed to like a different deity?
I think that definitely comes into a large part of it. I don't know that it's the definition, but it's definitely like part of something that comes into it. Exactly, and we're going to see a lot of that tonight. Tree worship in particular, yes. Ben.
A LARPer, and sometimes Romanian.
I will take Joe to respond to that one.
I didn't tell them to say that, but I will say they are often LARPers because most pagans, their structures have been destroyed and they're trying to recreate something that doesn't exist.
Gotcha. Yeah, because that's going to be a point here in a second, is that the modern definition of pagan is not really the definition people use when they make the claim that Christmas is pagan. Yeah. Any other ideas? Yes.
Is it like someone who believes in like rebirth in the sense of like what is it with Buddhism where you're reincarnated?
Yeah.
You also worship multiple like deities.
I think that again is like going into it a lot. I'm sorry. Yeah, just tying in really well with the definition of paganism. I'll show you now what the official definitions are, but I think all the ideas that have been thrown out are definitely like cultural definitions that people actually use on a day-to-day basis, and definitely valid definitions for it. But it actually came from a Latin word, as you might expect, pagus, which originally just meant a rural area, just anywhere like out in the countryside, and paganus, I believe, came to mean non-Christian from that. So I guess it originally meant somebody who lived out in a rural area, and eventually came to just mean, in ancient times, anyone who was not a Christian. The Ratio Christi, the reason for Christ, did not quite come to the paganuses as well as perhaps it ought to have. Yeah, I don't know what the plural of paganus is. Sorry, I'm a fraud, I don't speak Latin. But you can kind of see how eventually rural area, rural person, over the evolution of language, eventually came to mean non-Christian, and even then it has evolved since then. Because now the, so to speak, official definition would just be anyone who's following a non-major religion, like Islam or Buddhism, like you were saying, Judaism, Christianity, even atheism, things like that, we would call them pagan. But when we're talking about whether I'm going to keep saying that, whether Christmas is pagan, we're more talking about religions that were major back then, like Roman mythology, Greek mythology, Norse mythology, but that at that time were very not Christian. And like Mary was saying, had a lot of nature worship, like, is your name Morgan? Did I catch that? Morgan was saying, belief in reincarnation and other very non-Christian things. So, that out of the way, we do have to ask this. Are people actually asking if Christmas is pagan? I wasn't really aware that this was a question people had until about 2 years ago. One of my friends told me that she didn't celebrate Christmas, her family, because they believed that it had too many pagan originated beliefs. And more I've actually been hearing that, even from Christians, saying that it just seems too rooted in paganism. They can't accept it as a holiday, even if they know that the point is to be celebrating Jesus. So yes, people are asking if Christmas is pagan. This is a fairly common atheist claim, really, that they'll try to say like, oh, well, you believe in God, then how can you say that you also celebrate Christmas when clearly it has all of these pagan roots and you're just stealing all your traditions for Christmas from the pagan religions? But again, even some Christians don't celebrate this, they don't celebrate Easter, sometimes for other reasons, like, oh, we should celebrate Jesus every day. That could be a reason as well, but some because it's pagan. And what we're really trying to do here tonight is for all of you, this is my hope for all of you, that you would know where you stand and have a response when people ask. Really, everything in apologetics ties back to 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give an answer for the faith that you have, and that's definitely coming up here again. Hopefully nobody's putting their faith in Christmas as a holiday, but we're putting our faith in Christ, so we might as well be able to explain when someone says, okay, you put your faith in Christ, how then can you celebrate a pagan religion? We can hopefully explain whether or not Christmas is actually pagan. Now, I would like you to all picture a scene real quick with me. It's December. I mean, it's currently December, but in the scene that we're all imagining, it's December. Everyone is celebrating a god right now. People are having good feasts, good food. I hope all y'all had good food at Thanksgiving a couple weeks ago, so something kind of like that. Some people are walking and singing from door to door. Plants are decorating the insides of homes. When men and women see mistletoe, they think of romance. Ornaments are decorating trees, and wives are baking cakes out of fruit. What holiday is this? Apologies for the TV. But what holiday is this? Christmas. Yeah, it's Christmas, right? It's Saturnalia. Happy Saturnalia, everybody. That's what we're celebrating right now. Yeah, this was an ancient Roman holiday. I see the fist bump there. You must have guessed this. It was celebrated on December 17th, and later it was extended all the way out until the 23rd, just like a week of this party. It celebrated Saturn, who was the god of many things to the Romans, including time and wealth and freedom and all kinds of other things. It was a day or a week later of gluttony and drunkenness, primarily. Going back to the freedom point, another thing that they would commonly do on this holiday is any slaves that a family would have would be sort of set free, and then the family would go serve the slaves, but it would be more in a way to mock them. That's kind of where they got that idea, though, was from Saturn being the god of freedom. Doesn't really sound like anything we do at Christmas, does it? They'd have crazy parties. I told you about that going door to door singing. Well, that was while they were wearing nothing. The plants that they were bringing into their houses were not trees. They were more like branches. And the mistletoe romance was not just kissing, and we're not going to go into what that was. You can use your imagination if you want or not. And the ornaments that they were hanging up were on outdoor trees, not indoor trees. Sorry, I think the positioning got a little messed up there, but it says down there that fruit cakes that these wives I mentioned were making were for the soldiers to take into battles, because we all know that the Romans were constantly fighting in battles. Does this still sound like Christmas to you? Probably not, right? I see some shaking heads. That's a good thing. We're all kind of on the same page about this. I would like you all then to kind of hold this in the back of your head. We can think more about Saturnalia and whether Christmas is whether it's a problem or not for Christmas and for Christians. But for now, we're going to keep looking at, is Christmas pagan? We don't quite have enough evidence yet to really definitively say this, because let me tell you, it gets worse. We got to go through all of these different topics that are commonly stated to be pagan origins for Christmas traditions: Mithra, Horus, Sol Invictus, Yule, decorations, gifts, Santa Claus. The first 4 of those are pagan holidays, and then the other 3 are said to have come also from pagan traditions. But is that true or not? Let's take a look at these one at a time. All right, Mithra, he's first up on our list. You also might see his name, by the way, as Mithras. It's the same guy. He was an ancient Persian sun god. Eventually, the Romans kind of co-opted Mithra into their own Roman mythology and started worshiping him as well. not all Romans, that's why it says some Romans, but whichever ones did, and they decided that his birthday is December 25th. Is that a problem? That there was a sun god whose birthday was celebrated on December 25th. Does that pose a problem for Christians? Do you think?
Isn't it just a coincidence?
Coincidence? That could be a good answer. What else? Julian?
I'd say no, because there's disagreement as to what Jesus' birthday actually was.
That's a good point as well.
Like the Epiphany, for example.
Like the Epiphany.
January 6th is when the Eastern Orthodox Church celebrates its birthday.
That's true. Yeah. Different religions or branches of Christianity celebrate it on different days. Yeah. One thing I want to point out before we move on that's significant about December 25th is that on the ancient Roman calendar, the winter solstice was on December 25th. Something that we're going to see a lot here. I like that, ooh, I'm with you. Because something we're actually going to see a lot here is that these holidays that are claimed that Christmas was stealing from is that they're celebrating sun gods and that they happen on the winter solstice. That comes up over and over and over again. I mean, imagine that you lived before electricity and before, modern technology and all of that, and you lived on the land. You worked the land, you relied on it for crops, you relied on animals and crops for food. And when winter strikes and it gets cold and the sun goes away and, the daylight hours are so much shorter, on the day that's the shortest day of the year, and then after that, when the sun starts coming back, do you think you would celebrate that a little bit? Maybe wrong, maybe right not to. But it seems pretty likely that people would all agree, hey, this is a time to celebrate. The world is getting some more hope again now that the sun is coming back. We just say the S-O-N instead of the S-U-N. And as we'll see, there's a lot of other differences between the pagan holidays and Christmas. But this is some good food for thought, I think, to get you started on realizing, hey, maybe all is not as bad as it seems. I would like to, before we move on, hit on some more lies that you might hear about Mithra. Mike Winger put out a really excellent video on whether Christmas is pagan or not, and I would highly recommend watching it if you can. But his explanation of where we got a lot of these lies is this movie called Zeitgeist that released in 2007 that talks about a lot of different things, different kind of cultural things that are going on, and one of the first topics is about religion. And the creators of this movie are arguing, yeah, Christmas, the Christians were stealing that from Mithra and Horus and all these other gods. This is a screenshot from that movie, and Mike Winger in his video goes over why each of these is a lie and why we can know that Zeitgeist was, quote, their source was this one author who cited some other authors, but the original author, when you get back to the bottom of it, didn't cite any sources and was not actually a scholar in this area at all. So somebody at some point made all of this up, and then the lies just kind of spread like wildfire, as unfortunately lies kind of are prone to do. And Jesus warned us about this. So I'll just kind of hit on a couple of these briefly that are more interesting and even easier to debunk. One of them, Mithra being born of a virgin. No, it's very clear that Mithra was born out of a rock. Explain how that makes more sense. I don't know that you can, but that's what the Persians were saying. Born on December 25th, again, we talked about how that was a Roman idea. That was not the original birthday of Mithra when the Persians were worshiping this god. And lastly, performing miracles. Mike Winger put this excellently. The only thing he's actually known for is killing a bull. He did that once, and his followers feasted on it. That's all Mithra is known for. All right, so it seems like we might have cleared Mithra a little bit. Hopefully, you can see that the rest of these are lies. I'm not going to go all the way into them. But yeah, it doesn't seem quite obvious now that maybe Christmas is pagan. But we've got plenty of other things to tackle, including Horus. He was an ancient Egyptian sky god. I don't know if this video is, okay, yeah. We're going to watch just a couple minutes of this video. Lutheran Satire did this. Just the first couple minutes, and see what they say about Horus and the idea that he inspired Christmas. Hopefully the sound will work. I've got the sound all the way.
Thanks to all of you for coming out to our service this morning, and I pray that the rest of this Christmas day is wonderful for each and every one of you.
Not so fast, preacher man. Behold, it is I, Horus, Egyptian god of the sun. And while you all believe that you've been celebrating the birth of your Lord Jesus, you've really been celebrating the birth of me. For you see, thousands of years before your Jesus came around, I, Horus, was born on December 25th. I, Horus, was born of a virgin. I, Horus, was baptized by a man called Anup the Baptizer, was crucified and was resurrected 3 days later. So you see, your Jesus is nothing more than plagiarized poppycock. And I, Horus, have come to feast upon the sorrow of you foolish Christians.
Yeah, none of the stuff you just said is true.
Yes, it is.
No, there's no reference in Egyptian mythology to Horus being crucified or resurrected 3 days later. There's no documentation anywhere for the existence of a figure named Anup the Baptizer. Horus's mother was not a virgin woman, but the goddess Isis. And there is no specific date anywhere tied to the birth of Horus.
I'm pretty sure there is.
Actually, no. All of these claims and many others indicating that early Christians yoinked the mythology of Horus and stuck it on top of Jesus were all completely made up by Gerald Massey, a 19th century cuckoo banana bird self-taught Egyptologist who never provided the slightest shred of evidence for any of these claims and who was laughed out of the room by every serious Egyptologist on the planet. So thank you very much for your attempt to ruin our celebration of Christ's birth, but I'm afraid we're all still having a very Merry Christmas, Horus.
That is where we're going to stop it, just mostly for time. You could watch the rest of the video if you'd like to, because after that point, Horus turns into these other gods that are making similar claims about Christmas having stolen from them. But that's all we need to know about Horus. Again, kind of like Mithra, people are just kind of making it up and trying to use these arguments against Christianity and against Christians that really have no backing from archaeology and anthropology. All right. Next up on the board, sorry, there we go, Sol Invictus, he is next. This is another Latin word, which means unconquerable sun. And down here, I think it might be a coin. Some people have said it's a coin. Some people say it's just like a memorabilia kind of item, gold-plated thing. But it's a what? It's a coin. All right, well, we're gonna say it's a coin. How's that, Brian? Sure, but can you trade money for that? I mean, nowadays you could. Don't know about back then. But nowadays that's probably worth a lot.
You can melt it down.
That's true. You can melt it down, turn it into money. That's true. Now we could get into the discussion of is money pagan, but that's not quite where we're at right now. So Sol Invictus, unconquerable sun. He was, as you might expect, a Roman sun god in the 200 to 300s AD. I meant to put that on there. But yeah, so obviously came around after Jesus. And he was never a very important god. He was not like Zeus, who's, like the king god or anything. And he's not like Saturn, where we had Saturnalia, who was a god of lots of different things. He was really just kind of a minor god of the sun. But his birthday was celebrated on December 25th. Again, that was the Roman winter solstice. He had the same birthday that, for some reason, was given the same birthday as Mithra. And the original source that tells us what day Sol Invictus was born and tells us a lot that we know about Sol Invictus, that document also said that Jesus' birthday was December 25th. Because in the year 358, I believe, we'll have a timeline at the end of this presentation and we can see that for sure. But in the 300s, Christians actually declared, hey, we're going to officially say that our position is that Jesus' birthday was on December 25th. We can talk more about reasons why they would say that a little later, but same document declaring Jesus' birthday also declared Sol Invictus' birthday, so might be a little bit hard to make the claim that Christians were stealing from Sol Invictus, if that is the case. Next, we're going to talk about Yule, and I apologize that this drawing is a little hard to see, just because it's very black and white. Very finely detailed, but just a little hard to see. But the main thing I want you to notice is the trees and the fire here. That's going to become important. A lot of you are probably already familiar with the concept of Yule. We have Troll the Ancient Yuletide Carol. Yuletide being kind of another word for Christmas by certain people in some situations. And you may have heard of like burning a Yule log, or there's apparently a Christmas dessert called a Yule log that's made out of chocolate like that. So Yule, what does that have to do with Christmas? Well, it was an ancient Norse holiday, so like Vikings, that was celebrated, again, on the winter solstice. Fancy that. One of the main things that they would do that day is set a log on fire that was supposed to direct the sun to them. In case the sun was getting lost in the sky, this log on fire would help direct it back to them. Some people say that they might have also done human sacrifice or child sacrifice on Yule. I couldn't find any actual sources on that, but that could be a possibility, theoretically. I mean, I remember learning in history class about all these words that the Vikings gave us, like skull and knife and several others like that. So it seems kind of not implausible that they would be doing human sacrifice on Yule. But at least, the very least, they would set a log on fire. You might kind of think of a fireplace, but outdoors. They would also worship the dead on this day. Explain to me why you would kill a tree and then set it on fire and then worship the dead. I'm not really sure what all of this has to do with itself, but that's Yule for you. There was lots of eating and drinking, of course, as is pretty common with all of these pagan holidays. And they would also sacrifice animals, mainly like boars and cows, big animals. They would toast several of the gods, including Odin, who was one of the most important gods. He was the god of health and wisdom and also death and battles. Kind of covers a broad range, a lot like Saturn. But Odin, you might know, is also known as Woden, and that's where we get Wednesday from. So that's kind of the big thing to know about Odin. And Odin's going to come back up a lot. Not as much right now, but we'll see him again. Yule also coincided with a thing called the Wild Hunt, which was essentially people believed that they could see in the sky sometimes like visions of a bunch of animals being led across the sky by Odin, who would be riding a stag or a horse or something like that, and there would be all these animals. Some people claimed they could see it, other people just kind of believed it was happening around that time, but that was an important event to the Nordic people, and Wild Hunt occurred around the time of Yule. That's also going to come up along with Odin. And in the 900s, Yule was actually kind of combined with Christmas. That's why we have the Yule tide and the Yule log and all that kind of thing, because eventually they kind of got mixed up when Christianity was introduced to the Nordic people. All right, so we've kind of had a lot of thoughts so far about paganism and Christmas, and we're kind of going to change tracks now and not be talking about specifically pagan holidays, but other things that people say this came from paganism, tying back into the holidays in a lot of cases. But does anyone have any questions or thoughts or anything like that so far? Check what time it is. Okay, yeah, looks like we're on schedule. If I can't let you guys out at 8, do stick around because there's going to be, some wrap up answering this question and then a little bonus thing to look at. But yeah, hopefully we'll have a break at 8. I'll kind of reassess around then where we're at. Or we might go a little bit over. But all right, guess we'll come on to the next thing, which is, wanted to point out also that Yule is still celebrated by Wiccans, interestingly enough. If Julie DeVita was here, you could ask her more about that, I'm sure. But yeah, that's just kind of interesting. Not Christmas, but Yule. All right, Santa Claus. This is the topic I'm most excited about, and I hope you guys will find it as interesting as I do. So, Santa Claus, as many of us have heard, may be based on St. Nicholas, who was a real bishop who lived. I'm going to talk about him more in a sec, but, sorry for the little formatting thing, but what should Christians think of St. Nicholas? That's kind of the point that we'll be thinking about through this as we take a look at Santa Claus. So, first we need to know who St. Nicholas is, of course, this being a Greek icon of him. He was a Greek bishop of Myra, which is a city in Turkey. So in other words, he had Greek ancestry through his parents, but he served in Myra, which is a place in Turkey, in the late 200s to the mid 300s. He was persecuted, like other bishops at the time, for his faith. In fact, some people say his parents were completely persecuted and that he was left as an orphan at some point around maybe a teenager, maybe a young child, maybe 20s, not entirely sure. There's really not a lot of good documentation on the life of St. Nicholas, but we're going to kind of go with what we can here. He was always said to be faithful and benevolent, a good guy, a caring guy who was open to the work of God and to the Holy Spirit. To Catholics, he is still the patron saint of maritime workers, so like fishermen, sailors, bachelors, children, and toy makers. Hint, hint, that might be kind of interesting. Oh, what a revelation. In Europe, they actually have a holiday for St. Nicholas, which is called the Feast of St. Nicholas, as you might expect, and it is celebrated on December 6th. So a little bit before Christmas. This is people who would probably also be celebrating Christmas, but before then we have the Feast of St. Nicholas. And, oh yeah, if you remember from Joe's, what's the word, heretics talk, I can't think of the word right now. His heresies talk, he famously slapped the founder of Arianism at the Council of Nicaea. So quick review, what is Arianism? Not from Joe. Cringe, that's a good answer. What else? Anyone remember what Arianism is? Andrew?
I remember.
Yeah.
The idea that Jesus was a created being.
More or less, yeah. That he was God, but he was created later. Yep, so Santa Claus, guess what? Slapped the founder of that guy. So good for him. Alrighty. What else about St. Nicholas? How did that guy turn into Santa Claus? Kind of hard to see, but there is one story. A lot of people say it's legend. It might actually be true. We're not really sure. It's kind of fun to think that it might be true. And it could be true, but we don't know. About St. Nicholas, the real person. So one day when he was a little bit older than us, mid-20s, he heard of this impoverished family who lived nearby where the father could not afford for his 3 daughters to marry. He couldn't afford a dowry, and that meant that they couldn't, have husbands. And this was back in the day when the husbands would be the ones providing for the family. So the father was actually thinking about sending them into prostitution. And when St. Nicholas heard that, he could not bear to think of that. So on 3 different nights, he threw 3 bags of coins into the window of this family's house to provide for their dowry. And guess what? The daughters were thus able to get married and be saved from this. The father actually saw St. Nicholas on the last night, and he spread this story of St. Nicholas's benevolence and generosity throughout the entire area. So if you've ever received a bag of chocolate coins for Christmas from Santa Claus, you have St. Nicholas to thank for that. But St. Nicholas, it turns out, is not the only source for Santa Claus. I mean, we can't exactly get from that to jolly old red man with a white beard who rides reindeer and sleighs and climbs into people's chimneys. There's a few other sources for St. Nicholas as well. One of the most interesting ones being this guy, Sinterklaas. This is a Dutch name. It is essentially the Dutch equivalent of Santa Claus, at least that's where it comes from. And our name, St. Nicholas, our name Santa Claus came from Sinterklaas, which came from St. Nicholas. Hopefully that linguistically makes sense. But yeah, again, he is Dutch. This is a photo of him taken recently, but he's actually been around since the Middle Ages as a concept. Again, it's the parents doing it, as you might expect. But in the Middle Ages, Sinterklaas would put money into the shoes of Dutch children. Nowadays, instead of money, he actually gives them chocolate letters. Yes, letters as in letters of the alphabet. This doesn't make sense to me either. Like, do you get your initials and you get to eat them? I'm not really sure, but that's what he's known for now. He gives the Dutch children chocolate letters in their shoes. You can kind of see where we got stockings from, the shoes, probably. He does keep a list of who's naughty and who's nice, but for the naughty children, he does not give them coal. He slaps them with a broom and ships them to Spain, because he's from Spain, which is a little bit far from the North Pole.
Where's Julian?
He'll have to come back. He saw this presentation earlier. I hope you thought it was funny, because do you see why Sinterklaas cracks me up? This whole idea. It gets worse. You think this is funny, just wait for the click. All right, he has chimney sweep servants who are usually wearing blackface, which is why they're not depicted in this image. But children do not set out cookies and eggnog for them. They set out beer for his little helpers over there. And he rides a white horse, so you can see the white horse here, though. We did have to put him in. So we're starting to get a little bit closer to the idea of Santa Claus. You can see how, did I not put this in the slide? Oh yeah, okay, this was something to mention. On St. Nicholas Eve, so remember we had the Feast of St. Nicholas on December 6th. St. Nicholas Eve, of course, would be December 5th. So Sinterklaas visits the children on December 5th, which is a little bit before Christmas. To my understanding, in the Netherlands, everyone exchanges gifts, like as usual, on Christmas Day, but the children get like kind of early gifts on December 5th, the chocolate letters from Sinterklaas, into their shoes. All right, but we still got a little bit of room to go before we get to actual Santa Claus. As interesting as this feller is, there are several more Santa Claus sources as well. One of them is Odin. Guess what? He's our old friend. He's back. From Odin, we actually get the idea of the reindeer. So remember the wild hunt that Odin leads with all these animals? You can kind of see how maybe that transitioned into a sleigh with reindeer. That seems to be where it came from. And then the other thing is Odin had a long white beard. That's where we get that aspect of Santa Claus. Now, some people try to say that a lot of pagan religions and mythologies had like witches and warlocks who would give children presents. I couldn't actually find any good sources that said that. I don't know if that might be true or not. That might have kind of contributed to Santa Claus, but Odin is the only actual pagan origin I could find for Santa Claus. The rest of it is just kind of taking an actual historical figure and extrapolating it and kind of having fun with it, as it were. Next is Father Christmas, who to Americans is usually synonymous with Santa Claus, but actually that's not the case in ancient England. Father Christmas is more like the spirit of Christmas. He's kind of an embodiment and personification of the day of Christmas itself. He also had a long white beard, to the best of my memory, but he didn't like give out presents, and he wasn't like a children's guy. He was more for the adults to look up to. But over the years, he has kind of combined with Santa Claus, especially in America. Another one being the Ghost of Christmas Present. If any of you have read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, you might be familiar with this character. The Ghost of Christmas Present was really based on Father Christmas. That was Dickens' inspiration, since Dickens was a British writer. But from Ghost of Christmas Present, we get the jolly aspect of Santa, because Sinterklaas is actually a very serious guy. He's not the jolly guy that you think of when you think of Santa Claus. That came more from Charles Dickens. Oh, one other thing I want to say, because it's not on this slide, but before I get too far along, how many of you have heard of the other name for Santa Claus, Kris Kringle? Yeah. All right, so that actually came from Martin Luther, who was saying we need to stop putting so much emphasis on Santa Claus and other pagan things, or sorry, not necessarily pagan, but like secular things, other things that are not Jesus. We need to focus on the, Joe's gonna correct my German, the Christ child, the Christ Kringle. Kindle. How do you say it? Christkindl. So we turned Jesus into Santa Claus here. We went from Christkindl into Kris Kringle, which is another name for Santa Claus, which is what Martin Luther was trying to get rid of in the first place. Do you see how messed up this is? Anyway, there's two other sources for Santa Claus, or maybe just one, I forgot. Two, yes. A Visit from St. Nicholas, this poem by Clement C. Moore, at least it's attributed to him, it was actually anonymous, more commonly known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. This is where we get several ideas of Santa Claus. Again, the jolly old elf thing. It describes him as having a sack of toys and like rosy red cheeks. A lot of modern aspects of Santa Claus's depiction, but there is one crucial piece that's missing that was given to us by none other than Coca-Cola in the year 1920, which is his red outfit. Yes, Santa Claus wearing red is Coca-Cola marketing. It is Coca-Cola's branding. For some reason, all of us are also allowed to depict Santa Claus wearing red, but that came from Coca-Cola. You love America? I do too. That's an awesome reason to love America. So yeah, if you ever see, Santa Claus has only worn red for like 104 years. And if you ever see a version, like an illustrated version of The Night Before Christmas, like my family has, that depicts Santa wearing red, it must have been published, that version, after 1920. So just something very interesting to think about. There's so many different sources for Santa Claus. It wasn't just St. Nicholas, but he really doesn't seem to be pagan either. Everything kind of came from him, and then a little bit of Father Christmas mixed in there as well, and a little bit of American marketing. All right, so I think we spent enough time on Santa Claus, hopefully, given that he's not even that pagan. And the whole thing we're trying to analyze here is whether or not Christmas is pagan. So we're going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about decorations. There are really three things that people try to say of Christmas decorations are pagan. And I've lumped them together because they're so similar. But they're trees, ornaments, and lights. You probably remember from a few minutes ago, unless your memory is as bad as mine, that we were talking about trees in respect to Saturnalia and Norse mythology. Again, burning the Yule log for Norse mythology, and then with Saturnalia, they would put ornaments on trees outside. However, the key point, in both cases, the trees were outside. They were not bringing trees into their homes. And in Yule, they weren't even putting ornaments on them. I guess you could say that the fire was creating light, but it's not really the same thing as when you string Christmas lights on a tree. I just can't quite see those as being the same thing. Thank you, I appreciate the support. Again, the Nordic people worshipped trees, kind of going back to Mary's point. They just would worship the trees and also worship the dead and also set trees on fire. What a holiday. The idea of Christmas trees became a Christian tradition thanks to, again, Martin Luther, and possibly also St. Boniface. There's a little bit less popularity to this belief, but it's quite possible that both of them are valid here. But St. Boniface was saying that trees, when he was ministering to the Nordic people, give me just a sec if that's all right, unless it's urgent.
It's not urgent.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let me finish St. Boniface and then I'll come to you. But he was saying that trees are triangular, and then explaining how a triangle relates to the Trinity, and then saying also that trees point upward to God. So that's kind of one way of maybe how we got the Christmas tree. And now let Brian.
Joe had something to say.
All right.
I was gonna say, it's interesting you said the Nordic thing. I was talking with a Swedish friend of mine the other day, and he was saying that their pagan Yuletide hinged around burning the tree.
Right.
Especially, and like that's a huge contrast to how we celebrate Christmas. It's just interesting to point out like the difference in the tradition.
Absolutely. I don't know very many people, burning their Christmas tree.
I always burn mine in like April afterwards, so it has to dry, but that's different.
No worries. Do you just leave it up through April? Nice.
It's like a rocket engine.
Right. Just have the Christmas spirit all throughout the spring, right? Throughout the winter. The dead of winter. Sure it is. Yeah, no. But exactly like you're saying, it's hard to see how burning a tree literally turned into a Christmas tree. Because you can kind of see how like setting a log on fire in a fireplace, the classic Christmas scene, is related, but I don't think there's anything really pagan about a fireplace. Do you? Like, that's just a common sense way to keep warm. Once humanity invented fire as a way to stay warm, that's where we got that from. It's not a religious thing at all. Going into though how Martin Luther gave us Christmas trees. He is a saint. He might object to being called Saint Martin Luther because obviously that's what he was trying to do away with, but he is a saint. Sorry. So he was inspired one day as he was walking through the woods and saw the stars shining through the trees and was thinking about how Christ came down to us as light. From the book of John 1 explains this clearly. So he was thinking, since Jesus was coming to the earth and kind of passing all these trees, at least in a metaphorical sense, as he was coming down as a baby, it would be neat to put a Christmas tree into his family's home and put lights on it as a reminder of the way that Christ came down as light. So that's, I think, a better explanation of how we got a Christmas tree. That seems a little bit more relevant than the St. Boniface one, but again, two different ideas of maybe how this tradition came to be. But we do have an objection to this. Objection. Some people will point out to you Jeremiah 10, 2-4. Does anyone want to read this passage? You do.
Jeremiah 10:2-4. This is what the Lord says: Do not learn the way of the nations, or be terrified by signs in the heavens, although the nations are terrified by them. For the customs of the people are worthless. Someone cuts down a tree from the forest. It is worked by the hands of a craftsman with a chisel. He decorates it with silver and gold. It is fastened with a hammer and nails, so it won't totter.
Oh dear. That sounds an awful lot like a Christmas tree, doesn't it? It does. But let's read the context real quick. Slow down just a little and read the very next verse. Would anyone like to read this one? Go ahead.
Like scarecrows in a cucumber patch, their idols cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not fear them, for they can do no harm, and they cannot do any good.
Thank you. The key words here, their idols. What are these verses talking about? Idols, exactly. Is any of you worshiping your Christmas tree?
No.
Thank you. I hope not. These verses can't really be said to be definitely talking about a Christmas tree because Christmas trees did not exist when the Old Testament was written or even when the New Testament was written. So it's a little bit hard to apply it for that reason, but even then, the verses are very much talking about idols. That was a common pagan practice in the days of the Old Testament. People would chop down trees and bring them into their houses for the purpose of worshiping them. Therefore, you could take a stance either way on this theoretically, but it's not really easy or fair necessarily to say, yes, Christmas trees are evil and pagan because the Bible speaks against them. That's twisting scripture a bit because it's talking about this false worship and not worshiping God. Just remember when you're putting the star on your tree this year that it's a symbol of God, a symbol of something that you worship. It should be a reminder of the gift of God, but it should not be the object of worship itself. All right, last thing we're going to talk about now is gifts, gift giving. All right, so this is a common practice at many holidays. You know, Christians and even non-Christians very frequently give gifts at Christmas time. But even for Christians, there are other days when we give gifts. Think of Halloween, you give candy. I mean, not all Christians celebrate Halloween, but you could still look at it that way. Or you could think of Valentine's Day, especially for boyfriends and girlfriends and even family members, we give candy and little homemade cards, things like that. So gift giving is not really a strictly Christmas thing, but a lot of people will say, oh, but at these pagan holidays we've been talking about with the winter solstice, like Saturnalia, it was common for people to be giving gifts at these holidays. What I'm saying is that a problem though necessarily, that the similarity exists between gift giving at pagan holidays and gift giving at Christmas? Again, done around Saturnalia, but it was more common for Christians even to give gifts at New Year's. Until the 1800s, Christmas gift giving was not a huge thing. It was mostly a New Year's thing, and in fact in Japan, that's still the big gift-giving day. So the argument's starting to fall apart a little bit, perhaps, but where did Christians get the idea that we need to give gifts at Christmas? What do y'all think? You can take a second to discuss it with people if you want to. It's what? It's the wise guys. Could be. What else? Why do we do gifts at Christmas and not any other holiday? The big gift giving, that is, again. We can take a look at the answers. That's fine. There's quite a few reasons, I think, that kind of all contribute, could be reasons. But yeah, the first one, again, gifts from the Magi, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. One thing you do need to note, though, is that the Magi, most of you probably know this, I'll just kind of restate it a little bit since it's relevant, that the Magi most likely did not come to Jesus that close around his birthday. It was probably more when he was about 2 years old, is what most scholars believe, since Matthew, which is recording the story of the Magi, says that they went to a house. It doesn't say they went to the manger or anything like that. It seems that Jesus he was like still kind of a baby, kind of a toddler, somewhere in that range, when the Magi, who were traveling all the way from the east, probably on camels, were able to come to him, that the star was guiding him. Note that a star was guiding them. Again, the star on top of a Christmas tree is not pagan. Yes, there are people who worship the sun and stars for these pagan holidays, but the star that we put on the tree comes from the Magi, using the star to lead them to Jesus. So I don't think that's pagan either. Other things, St. Nicholas, you know, again, when he threw the money bags into the window, that gives us the idea that Christmas should be a day for gifts. Hanukkah. Hanukkah is mentioned in the Bible. It's usually not called that in most translations, but it is said that Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. So going into that, a lot of people try to make the argument that you can't celebrate any holiday that's not explicitly commanded by God in the Old Testament, but that can't be true because Hanukkah happened, what it's celebrating came between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and Jesus celebrated it in the New Testament. Jesus was God. Therefore, it can't be wrong to celebrate holidays that God didn't specifically tell us to celebrate. A little bit of a sidetrack there, but tying it back into our holidays pagan and not just is Christmas pagan for you. But the big thing is that Hanukkah for Jews is a gift-giving holiday. So the Christians were saying, you know, a lot of Christians being Gentiles didn't celebrate Hanukkah, which you could argue whether that's right or wrong for whether Christians need to be celebrating Jewish holidays or not. But Christians kind of seem to have wanted their own gift-giving holiday. And since Hanukkah occurs right around the time of Christmas, it makes sense that Christmas would be the gift-giving day for Christians. And another reason, this one seems to be the most important one, I'll get to you in just a sec, Andrew. Jesus himself came as the greatest gift, the one to take our sins away. And our gift exchanges now at Christmas are in celebration of this and in remembrance of this as we share the love that Jesus has for us with others and express it through Christmas. Yes, Andrew?
I was going to ask, you said Hanukkah is not usually called that in the Bible.
Right.
What is it called?
In different translations, I'm trying to remember. Now that you asked, I don't know it. It's the Feast of something, but it's recorded in the book of John.
I think it's dedication.
Dedication. That's correct, yes. Thank you, Sarah. Feast of Dedication is what most Bibles say it is. But it's Hanukkah. If you look in your little study notes, it should say that it's Hanukkah. But yeah. Okie doke. So one lingering question you may have about gift giving at Christmas is, when did gift giving seem to be like the big thing about Christmas? That would be in the 1900s. That was when Christmas kind of became commercial. This movie, what is it called? A Charlie Brown Christmas. I knew that, yes, Charlie Brown Christmas. Came out in 1966. And if you remember this quote, "My own dog gone commercial," Charlie Brown lamenting Snoopy, his fate. In the 60s was right around the time when Black Friday became a thing. It wasn't really a big thing until the 80s, but the 60s is kind of when it started. And by that point, we were starting to go in the direction of Christmas being very secular and very commercial in America, but we weren't quite all the way there yet to the extent that we are. It seems like the Roaring 20s, perhaps 100 years ago, kind of pushed us into the idea that, oh, you need to get these big sales and give big extravagant gifts and lots of gifts. In other countries, they cannot afford to give everybody multiple gifts at Christmas. If you got multiple gifts at Christmas as a child, you are extremely fortunate, and I do say that as a good thing. But just understand that it's not always been commercial. It has not always been such a secular thing. Even if you want to argue that it's always been a pagan thing, you can't necessarily argue, like pagan traditions, you can't necessarily argue that the focus has always been so off of Jesus the way it is now. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. Why, thank you. I have to admit that I stole that from a cross-examined article that used the phrase wrapping up in the conclusion. Apologies, I do credit her. She had a great article that directed me to the Mike Winger video. But the question is Christmas pagan? What would y'all say right now as your answer to this?
Depends how you celebrate it.
That's a good answer. What else? I can't believe that none of you have an opinion on this at this point. I mean, we've spent an hour talking about it. Sure, you got something. Andrew?
I was going to say, in a nice way,
Okay.
I'd say it doesn't really matter as long as you aren't doing pagan things, like worshiping pagan gods, or, in other words, if you're worshiping Jesus at Christmas, then you can't really call Christmas a pagan holiday.
Okay. There's an answer. Julian?
It's got some pagan influence, but it's not hopelessly pagan.
I like that answer a lot, yes. The other answers have been good, but that too? Any others? I mean, Julian read the presentation already, so definitely hit the nail on the head. But yes, that's pretty much what I'm going to say, is that no. I think it's safe to conclude that Christmas is not pagan. It is similar to many pagan traditions, but it's clearly unique. Now, why is it so similar to many pagan traditions? A major reason being that Christians were looking at all of these pagan holidays occurring around the winter solstice, celebrating the sun, and just doing all these evil things, and said, hey, let's try to turn this around and put some focus on Jesus. It's a lot easier to take something existing and try to put the focus on Jesus than it is to, oh, let's invent our own holiday and come up with all our own traditions and get everyone to celebrate it. Think of Paul in the book of Acts, when he sees that statue or whatever it is that's marked to an unknown God. And Paul explained, hey, that unknown God you're looking for is Yahweh. It's the one true God, but that's the God you're looking for. He's kind of taking that polemic. And in this way, we can also say that the early Christians were saying, hey, we see what you're doing with all these horrible pagan things. Well, there's this guy, Jesus, who says, let's take out a lot of that stuff, but maybe some of it we can kind of allow into this just in order to help show that this is a better thing to be worshiping, this Jesus. Because Christmas is celebrating Jesus. It's not celebrating false gods, it's not celebrating nature, and it's not celebrating hedonism. What are all these pagan holidays celebrating? False gods, nature, and hedonism. That's basically what all of it boils down to. I don't think any of y'all have been celebrating that at Christmas, right? I hope not. So for that reason, it's fair to say that Christmas is not pagan, even though it has some pagan influence and traditions. But you might say, what if you're still not comfortable with celebrating it? Some of you, even after all of this, might not be. You know what? That is okay. It really is. It's not just me saying that to be nice. It really is okay if you don't want to celebrate Christmas, because would anyone like to read this passage from Paul? Ben would love to.
Excuse me. Paul said, I know and am persuaded by the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean in itself. Still, to someone who considers a thing to be unclean, to that one it is unclean. Therefore, do not let your good be slandered. For the kingdom of God is not of eating and drinking, but righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. Do you have a conviction? Keep it to yourself before God. The man who does not condemn himself by what he approves is blessed. But whoever doubts stands condemned if he eats, because his eating is not from a conviction, and everything that is not from a conviction is sin.
Thank you, sir. So you can see that this verse is specifically talking about eating, talking about food being clean versus unclean, as according to the Jewish rules that God provided in the Old Testament. But a lot of these apply to a lot of situations, and we'll see that later in another verse that I'll share from also Romans 14. But what really is important here, do you have a conviction? Keep it to yourself before God. The man who does not condemn himself by what he approves is blessed. Everything that is not from a conviction is sin. And again, nothing is unclean in itself. To someone who considers a thing to be unclean, to that one, it is unclean. That's what's really important here. So if you say Christmas, I'm just not really comfortable with all of these pagan roots and origins that it has, or maybe I'm not comfortable with how secular it is now. If that is a true conviction that you feel, then let none of us tell you that you need to be celebrating Christmas. But at the same time, don't you be telling us that we can't celebrate Christmas, because after all of this evidence that we've looked at, I hope you agree that it is dishonest, wrong to say that Christmas just flat out is pagan, or that flat out no Christian should ever celebrate Christmas, that it is a sin for all Christians to celebrate it. Because again, if we're putting the focus on Jesus, kind of as Andrew said and as others have said throughout the night, then it seems that this is one of those good and perfect gifts that God talks about, that he's giving us. We can have all these other things, gift giving and Christmas trees and ornaments and lights and things of that nature, because God has given them to us to enjoy. The focus certainly is on Jesus, but he's given us other ways to symbolize this meaning to ourselves, other things to enjoy, to be vessels through which we can worship the Lord, and symbols and reminders of this gift that he gave us by coming into the world. So, I would like to present to you a Christmas timeline, just since I know there's a lot of events going on here, and it can be a little confusing about when things were happening. Just a couple that I'd especially like to point out. One of these being the visit from the Magi. Sorry, Jesus born and the visit from the Magi did not happen in the year 0, mainly because there was no year 0. But unfortunately, there was a little bit of a mathematical calculation when people were determining when to separate BC and AD, because that differentiation is supposed to be based on when Jesus was born. But unfortunately, given what we later learned about when King Herod died, it was not possible that Jesus was born in 1 BC or 1 AD. It seems to have been more like around 6 BC, from what we can tell. Also, apologies for the crudity of the model. I didn't have time to build it to scale or to paint it. But we can also see something else interesting here, that in 400 AD, we had the first written record of Yule. 400 AD, that's a little bit late, and it is after the Christians declared that they wanted to celebrate Jesus' birthday on December 25th. So it's a little bit hard to say that Yule or Christmas is completely stealing from Yule, especially given the date of December. Another thing, Christmas declared a national holiday in America was not until 1870. That was recent history, guys. It's been only a short while that Christmas has been actually a national holiday where everyone gets to take off work and all of that. All right, and I told you there was going to be a bonus if you stayed until the end. Sorry, we have to get through this first. Not that we have to get through the Bible in that way, but anyone would like to read this passage from Romans 14? Then I promise we will actually wrap up. I see lots of different pointing in hands.
Max will do it.
All right, Max, go ahead. I think you already read one, but sure.
Accept anyone who is weak in faith, but don't argue about doubtful issues. One person believes he may eat anything, but one who is weak eats only vegetables. One who eats must not look down on one who does not eat, and one who does not eat must not criticize one who does, because God has accepted him. Who are you to criticize another's household slave? Before his own Lord he stands or falls, and he will stand, for the Lord is able to make him stand. One person considers one day to be above another day. Someone else considers every day to be the same. Each one must be fully convinced in his own mind. Whoever observes the day observes it for the honor of the Lord. Whoever eats, eats for the Lord, since he gives thanks to God. And whoever does not eat, it is for the Lord that he does not eat, yet he thanks to God. For none of us lives to himself, and no one dies to himself. If we live for the Lord, and if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord.
Thank you, Max. Just rest on this verses as you go about through finals week, as you come into Christmas, these ideas that whoever observes the day observes it for the honor of the Lord. And with that, we have a little bonus here. AI-generated Christmas. All right, so I wanted, if you remember that slide earlier with arrows pointing to different things, asking if they're pagan or not, I wanted to get Dolly Mini crayon to generate me some pictures of common things that may be considered pagan or not, common Christmas scenes. This is what I got. For some reason, it keeps wanting to put Santa Claus in the Nativity. I don't understand that one at all. And sometimes it also wants to give 2 Marys. I don't know what's happening in this picture right here, the top middle on the left. I don't know what's happening here with Santa Claus, like, rocking the baby Jesus. Santa Claus and Mary, who's dressed like Mrs. Claus, or reading carols, or praying, or reading the Bible or something. What are the 2 Santa Clauses? This is Santa Claus, this is Sinterklaas. That's all I can explain for that. And then we've got Mary growing out of Mary's head. Anyway, we could have lots of fun laughing at AI, but the point is that it's not taking your job away anytime soon. All right, some sources, which unfortunately some of them got cut off. There were a lot of sources that went into the making of this. And with that, maybe. Nope. Never mind. I was going to give you a slide with a little gif about Christmas, but apparently it didn't make it here.
If you hit the space bar, maybe go to the next one.
Nope.
AI deleted that one.
Yep, we can go with that. Okay, so the AI is now taking my job away and making me look silly for not having a little Merry Christmas. But anyway, I say to you all, Merry Christmas.